Why were we miseducated? How were we miseducated? And what can we do to bridge the gap? I believe it is the duty of us as individuals to honor our history and pave way for our future. My name is Chantal Mukabi, and I would like to talk today about the miseducation of Black people. Firstly, I'd like to flag that this is not an anti-West or anti-white conversation, nor is it a conversation that is meant to criticize us for not knowing enough about our history, but rather one that's meant to bridge the gap between us as Africans and our history of our culture and our heritage and what we should hold dear to us. So I'd like to discuss 3 questions today. Why were we miseducated? How were we miseducated? And what can we do to bridge the gap? So on the first question of why, I think Carter G. Woodson sums this up quite nicely in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, where he says, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. And this is why we were miseducated. But how exactly were we miseducated? And here I'd like to talk about just a few forms, the first of which being the most relatable, which is our hair. Why is it that when I walk into an interview or when I walk on the street with this afro, I'm considered someone who is lesser than the rest of us? This is because we've been conditioned to buy into the narrative that our hair needs to stop looking like afros, needs to not look kinky, but rather to look more like the white man, have soft, straight, flowy hair. This is why we continually buy into the market of weaves and chemicalizers and hot combs, etc. We never got a chance to really connect with what our hair meant to us and the different ways through which we used to communicate aspects of our social identities. Our hair, before we were colonized, used to communicate things like our marital status, our wealth, our fertility, our religion, our manhood, and so many other aspects about our identities. But when the white man shaved us, they took away that part of our identities as well. Fashion. Why is it when I walk into an interview with a Western suit, I'm taken much more seriously than if I walk into an interview wearing this, our African kitenge? This is because we still attach a sense of intellectualism and superiority to the professionalism that has been brought upon us from the West. We as Africans do not have an original definition of what is professional to us, and that is something that we can take a leaf from countries like Nigeria, where they openly wear their traditional, beautiful African materials in whatever aspect of work that they enter, whether one is a driver or a construction worker or a mid-management worker, a CEO, a business owner, they all wear their African materials with pride and with love. Thirdly, language. And this is something that we as Africans are very guilty of doing. Trevor Noah says, when you have an accent, it is just you trying to speak someone else's language with the rules of yours. But we as Africans tend to equate fluency in languages like English and French to levels of intellect or contribution to the intellectual community. We are shamed when we speak these languages with accents that are influenced by our mother tongues, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for our intellect as it is, and not our intellect that is attached to our levels of fluency of English, French, and other Western languages. Fourthly, art. I find it quite sad that just recently Germany wanted to give back the Nigerian Benin bronzes to Nigeria, but certain groups in Nigeria were opposed to this because they were saying that we don't have the capacity to take care of these bronzes, and yet they were the ones who created them. They're the ones who were the victims of colonization when they were stolen from them. This speaks to the toxic mentality that we have as Africans, that we don't have a sense of originality, we don't have the ability to create sophisticated art or infrastructure, and we constantly need to mimic the West or emulate them. This is something that we definitely need to be conscious of as Africans. But lastly, history. Have you ever heard of the phrase "from here to Timbuktu"? Timbuktu has been characterized as this mystical, faraway place that either is very impossible to get to or doesn't even exist. But in reality, Timbuktu is a city in Mali that used to be the trade center of West Africa. And it used to be glorified for the development of West Africa pre-colonial times. And right now, it is considered the African treasure because it holds the manuscripts, thousands and thousands of manuscripts that dictate our African history. They took down things like rituals, 500-year-old recipes for things like toothpaste and herbal concoctions that we used to use whenever we got sick. They took down things like our lifestyles, our traditions, our values, and how the people there used to live life before we were colonized. The only reason they still exist is because the Malian people hid them in certain places when they were being colonized by the French. And so now that they're being unearthed, we still have a connection to that history that we need to value, that we need to honor, and something that the rest of Africa needs to take note of and realize that Timbuktu is not this mystical place, but actually the home of our African treasure. So lastly, the third question, how exactly do we bridge the gap? I'd like to talk firstly about the curriculum in educational institutions. We do not honor our African history in our local education systems or in our international ones. And this is where Pan-African schools have really taken precedence. Pan-African schools like the Winnie Mandela Saturday School that was there in London have given birth to prominent African scholars like Akala or Kingsley James Daly, who are huge voices in talking about African history and bridging that gap that we are seldom taught in our educational institutions. And it is not enough that these schools are only Saturday Pan-Africanist schools. We need to incorporate this correct history in our fundamental education systems in all African countries and at all educational levels. But secondly, awareness. It's not enough for us to just have this education, but we need to make it available through different media to different groups of people. We need to be able to reach the youth and other different groups of people through advertising and through engaging them in conversations that we can make available through things like podcasts and movies and songs and books and comic books, cartoons. Just make it available in the most diverse way possible. And this is the way that we can begin to educate our population. But lastly, and the most important thing, is make it a part of our lifestyles. We need to reconnect with our identity. We need to go out in the street and wear our afros with pride. We need to wear our African traditional materials to things like job interviews and high-level institutions. We need to be aware of our unconscious biases that we have around things like fluency in English and accents. We need to become a part of the history that we have abandoned until now. And so I'd like to leave us with an African proverb that I think sums up our topic of miseducation quite well, which is, until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. Thank you.